Hey guys, welcome back. Now today's video is going to be about my life in Japan. As most of you probably know, I no longer live in Japan. I moved back to Australia, and this was a video that I was thinking about doing for a very long time, and then I did have a few people request it as well. So I thought I should put one together to fill you guys in on what it was like for me to live in Japan, and also like a recap for myself and kind of reflect on my time there. So obviously this is going to be a really long video, and I actually have like written down mainly what I'm going to talk about, because if I don't, I'm sure I will like go on forever. So I hopefully have included everything in here. I did make a post just the night before I was filming asking you guys if you did have any questions, and I will be including those in the video. If I didn't include it, I am sorry, but it was probably posted after I filmed the video, so I will respond to you on the post. Cool, so I guess we're gonna dive right in. I will just let you guys know in advance, the first half is going to be, or probably not even half, but most of the video is going to be just general my life in Japan and what Japan is like, and then at the end I'm going to do a little bit of being mixed or hafu or biracial in Japan. If you didn't know already, I am half Japanese and half Australian, so it is a little bit different for us living in Japan as well. So I'll include a little segment on that and leave a time mark in the description if anyone wants to skim to that. All right, let's start this thing. So first I will talk about kind of the reason why I moved to Japan in the first place. From 2015 to 2016, I did my year abroad in America. If you guys don't know about that, I will leave playlists in the iCard so you guys can check that out. But basically I did a year in America working at Disney World, and then in June or July, I think it was July. In July of 2016, I hope I have this right. I have this right, 2016. Yeah, okay. So I will just let you know in advance as well, I did this year abroad like straight after I graduated uni. Bam. So in July of 2016, my visa in America was up, and basically was like, what do I want to do with my life now? I felt like if I stayed in Australia, I basically had to like find a adult full-time job, build a career, do all of that adult stuff, and I just didn't want to do it. That was it. I just didn't want to settle. So as I was like heading back to Australia, I was like, you know what? I've never actually lived in Japan. And prior to going to America, if that wasn't going to work out, I was actually thinking about it anyway, not just going for a holiday, but actually living there, which didn't end up happening. So it was still something that was in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, maybe someday I'll do it. And I thought, what great opportunity. I don't have any commitments per se right now. So after I came back from America to Australia, I was in Australia for approximately 2 or 3 months. It was November of that year of 2016 that I decided I'm just going to book a one-way trip to Japan and see how I go there. One thing I do need to mention is that I do have citizenship in Japan. So I did not need a visa to go over. I did not need a visa to work. So I'm sure that's very different for a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people don't have that opportunity, and you do have to get a visa to go to Japan. So in regards to that, I do not know much about it. I'm really sorry, but I luckily do have citizenship in Japan. So it wasn't really like a worry for me going over there and looking for a job. I arrived in November, and of course it had been a while since I had been in Japan, probably a year and a half at least since I had been in Japan. So I first just needed to settle before I was instantly like, okay, I need to find a job. And also it was like the end of the year, so I just had this mindset like, you know what, I might just like take the rest of the year off. While I was in Australia for 3 months, I was working quite a bit, so I had saved enough money that I could be good without earning anything. And what made that possible though was that I actually lived with my grandparents who lived in Japan. So I did not have to find a place to rent. I did not have to live elsewhere or pay rent because I lived with my family. So that's another thing that a lot of people probably would not have in common, and it's something that I was just very, very fortunate to have. That's the reason why I could kind of just sit back and be like, hey, I don't have to get a job instantly. That's was my situation. I moved to Japan without needing a visa and already had a place to live, so obviously super fortunate. When I first moved, I was considering moving out after a while. My 2 best friends that I used to go to Japanese school with in Australia lived together, so I was like, oh, maybe I could live with them, that would be really cool. But I will tell you later why that didn't happen. So first I'm going to talk about the living aspect of Japan. One of you guys did ask about rent in Japan. As I said, I did not pay rent, but I would say it's really hard because I live in Australia, which is pretty expensive with everything. The cost of living is pretty high. So compared to Australia, the rent was definitely cheaper, although the places were very small. There's a lot of apartments, just like 1-bedroom apartments. Even if you compared it to like a unit or a flat over here, it's still probably smaller. The rent isn't bad compared to Australia, but I wouldn't say it's like super cheap, like super affordable. It was still very hard to maintain just living by yourself, and that from what I had heard from co-workers and friends and stuff. And I think something that's really big to do with that is the pay rate in Japan, which I'll talk about later. The cost of living, as I said before, is going to be slightly cheaper than Australia, but I wouldn't necessarily say it is like definitely super cheap, like if you compare it to other Asian countries. I only know from like traveling and stuff, but there's some countries where like food, like $1 and you can get like a big meal. It wasn't like that. Just going to the shopping center, buying groceries and stuff like that, it is cheaper generally, the cost of living in Japan compared to Australia. I guess America as well, I would say it is maybe about the same or slightly cheaper. So it'll go like Japan, America, Australia with the cost of living. This was something Logan told me to include, which I thought was like, I guess quite interesting. Health insurance in Japan is like necessary. You have to be in health insurance. They have national health insurance, which you're like basically automatically put into when you apply to be like a resident in Japan. First, I was paying that just like monthly as a citizen before I had a job, which I think it was about $50 a month or something. But of course it can change depending on your area. Oh, that's probably what I should have said in the beginning. I lived in Chiba, which is like pretty much right outside Tokyo. It's where Tokyo Disney is. If you guys didn't know, yep. Tokyo Disney actually isn't in Tokyo, but it is in the prefecture of Chiba. So that is where I lived. It was probably 30 minutes or so by train to just get into Tokyo, and then to get to like central Tokyo, it was like 40 minutes or so of a train ride. So it wasn't that far from the city. It's actually pretty much the same for me in Australia. It's like slightly suburban area in Japan. As I was saying, health insurance can be different depending on the prefecture and where you live. I believe I was paying about $50 a month on national health insurance, and then after that it was like automatically taken through my pay when I started working. So my company like just dealt with it for me, and most people who work do go into like health insurance with their company. The safety of living in Japan, I would definitely say it is very safe to live in Japan. Of course there's going to be more dangerous areas and things still happen, like, you know, assaults and murder and all of that still happen, definitely. But say if I'm just a female at night walking home or something, I don't feel like in danger at all. Even in the city, it's definitely not that dangerous. And I think the pure fact that there's so many people as well in Tokyo, like the general just amount of people, makes it feel a lot safer than I would say like if I was in America and I was in like downtown Orlando or something, like I probably wouldn't feel as safe. And also even in Australia, usually I don't feel like, but you know, there's still those people who will say something or kind of approach you or whatever, which is like not as common in Japan. Shopping and leisure is awesome. Like there's so much to do in Japan. Doing like activities in Japan is very common for leisure. Like in Australia, I feel like when you hang out with people, it's like, hey, let's go for a coffee, or hey, do you want to come over, let's watch a movie, make dinner or something. Like it's very chilled and like, yeah, I don't know what you call it, but very like family homey kind of. Whereas in Japan, it's like doing something, like going karaoke, going bowling, going to a leisure center, going to a theme park, like going to the movies and stuff like that. And there's a lot to do. Like there is definitely a lot to do, which is great. And like karaoke is so cheap. It depends on where you go, but my local one, it's like $3 for an hour or something per person to do karaoke, and it's awesome fun and it's great. So it's definitely not something in Australia where you can just go to like a leisure center and do stuff. And shopping is super fun, obviously. I wouldn't necessarily say like beauty and clothing and all of that is a lot cheaper in Japan. I would not say so, especially if you have been to other Asian countries that are super cheap. You'll probably find it quite expensive. Even like makeup and stuff like that. Of course they have like really cheap stuff and then really expensive stuff, so it just totally depends on what you buy. But I wouldn't say it's like super cheap to shop in Japan compared to Australia, for sure. Compared to America, like makeup's probably about the same. I don't know, makeup in America seems so cheap for me because I know the like prices of the same products in Australia, and it's just like, ugh. Last thing I might talk about with living is food. Food in Japan is so freaking good. If you watch my vlogs, or if you like even follow me on Instagram, maybe you would have seen all of like the Japanese food I devoured over there. It is so amazing. But I do eat absolutely everything. I don't have like allergies to anything. I don't not eat anything. I'm not vegetarian or vegan, so I do eat absolutely everything, and I'm not a fussy eater, so I find the food there delicious. If you do have a particular diet, you might find it hard to feed yourself in Japan, especially vegetarian and vegan diets is going to be quite hard. When you're eating out, especially if you're cooking for yourself, it's probably not going to be that bad, but eating out is definitely hard. In Australia, like no matter where you go, there would definitely be a vegetarian option and most likely a vegan option these days, whereas in Japan they may have a vegetarian option, and then vegan option will be very, very hard. Also because they do use a lot of seafood in their cuisine, and a lot of broths or like flavoring or stuff they use is from meats and fish and stuff like that. So if you are vegan, especially if you are planning to eat out a lot in Japan, it might be a bit hard. Another thing I noticed was fresh produce. Like they definitely have some, and some stuff is really, really cheap even compared to Australia, like bean sprout, cucumbers, like Japanese vegetables. I know that sounds weird, but like daikon, like white radish and stuff like that. But general fresh produce, and especially like fruits, are super expensive, hard to find fresh, and also hard to find a lot of. I eat so much vegetables and fruit, and since I've been back, I've been absolutely loving it over here. But when I try to find like capsicum in Japan, they're like this big literally. Whereas over here, like capsicums are like that big, they're like legit. So fresh produce is definitely something that lacks a little bit in Japan. There's definitely stuff you can buy, but anything that's fresher or like good quality usually costs like a whole lot more. I'm sure you guys have seen those like $100 melons or like $15 apples and stuff like that. It's totally true. Fruit is definitely like really hard to get a lot of fresh and big and good, and vegetables somewhat as well. Let's get to the working aspect of things in Japan. So I think people figured that I did not work as an English teacher in Japan. I feel like that is usually or the most popular profession to work in living in Japan. I was, as I said, have citizenship, so I could apply to jobs as like a Japanese person. I could apply to basically any job a Japanese person can apply to. I cannot say exactly what I did as a job because of the policies of the company I worked at, but anyone who thinks about it for like 2 seconds and pays attention to my videos, you'll be able to figure out super easy. So I applied for a job that I was very familiar with, especially in America, with a big entertainment company. I worked at a theme park. 3 guesses where? I'm pretty sure there's like three theme parks in Japan anyway, but I worked in entertainment there, which funnily enough, I was not the entertainment, so I was not one of them. That sounds really bad. I worked in entertainment, but I was not the entertainment personally, but I worked in that field. First thing I need to say is that it is a globally recognized global company, and they definitely have like more international values than say a regular company in Japan. Like it was definitely not your average workplace in Japan. I would not say most places are like this, and they do employ a lot of foreigners as well, so they're like, you know, they know. I worked full-time there, but it was treated as almost like casual work there, which is like really hard to explain because like there's no quite situation like that over here. Here, if you work full-time hours, you are a full-time employee, you get full-time benefits and all of that. Whereas over there, I definitely worked full-time hours, sometimes more than full-time hours, but I was not treated as like a have full benefits full-time employee. I was still treated as like, say, a casual employee, which I find like really interesting. And there's people who have done the job I did for like over a decade, for so long, and I'm just like, they deserve more, was like basically what my conclusion was. I worked 5 days a week, sometimes 6. If they didn't have enough people, I would pick up a 6th shift, and I would be working 6 days in a row with 1 day off. If not, when I was usually doing 5 days, I had split days off. It was usually like 3 days on, a day off, 2 days on, a day off, like that. The hours were normal, I'd say. Like shifts would be like basically equivalent to a 9-to-5. They were like 8-hour shifts, although they were quite early because the place opened early. So the earliest shift I would start at like 7:15 and then finish around 3 or something, I believe, 3 or 4. Generally like a 7 to 8 hour shift, sometimes less, but most of the time were very early, which meant I had to wake up very, very early because I lived about an hour out from where I worked. I took public transport every day to and from work, and it was about 1 hour each way. So the days it was really early, I had to catch the train at like 6:02. I still remember because I did it like every single day, but it was really, really early. I had to get up at like 4:30. I remember when I first started, I started in January, so it was the middle of winter, the coldest, and I would leave the house with it being dark outside, and then I would get home and it'll be dark outside. So it was quite miserable because I like didn't see the light of day unless I was at work. So I felt kind of miserable to begin with, just because like the hours seemed really long, but it was more the traveling and that took up the time. But there were people who were traveling like 2 hours each way, an hour and a half each way, and I say an hour, but that's like an hour door to door. So it's like, it was a 10-minute walk for me to get to the station, and then about 40-45 minutes on trains, taking 3 different trains, yes, and then it was a 10-minute walk to get to the workplace. And then also I had to change at my workplace because I had my uniform at work, so I would change at work and then had to go to the location where I started off my day. It seemed like a lot of my day was taken up with work, and that is why basically my YouTube kind of fell back. I was not very active because I just didn't have time. The days I worked, I was so exhausted, and it was fairly late when I got home. I'd eat dinner and then I'll have like a couple of hours before bed, and then I had to get up at 4:30 again. So it was really hard for me to stay on top of YouTube. And then on my days off, because I only ever had like 1 day off at a time, I would be like, oh, I want to sleep in, I want to catch up on my sleep, I want to rest, and then the day will be over and then I have to work the next day. So it was really hard for me to keep on top of it. Excuses, but the hours were pretty intense, I guess. The pay was, I won't say my exact pay, but in general, if you worked like a casual or part-time job or whatever in Japan, 1,000 yen is like considered good. A lot of places, if you're like a student, you'd get like 800 yen an hour. With the currency exchange jigs, what do you call it? Currency exchange rate, that's what it is. In today's day and age, 2018 November, 1,000 yen equivalent to Australian dollars is $12. Let's have a quick look at US dollars. $8. Wow. So 1,000 yen right now in November 2018 equates to $12 Australian, and then about $8 US. So if you put it that way, it is not a lot of money, especially compared to Australia, where the minimum pay rate, I believe, in Australia is like $18 something, and most places, well, at least for me working in retail, is a lot more than that. So pay rate is definitely lower, although obviously with the cost of living, it kind of makes sense, but still it's pretty low. And for me to come from Australia, working casual, the pay rate was like, woo. But it wasn't necessarily like just the company I worked at. A lot of at least retail places, all part-time casual jobs, 10 bucks was good. Like that was still pretty good per hour pay. So pay wasn't exactly ideal. Hours were pretty long, and then time off is something really, really hard to get in Japan. I didn't have any paid days off until I had worked with the company for 6 months. And once I was with the company for 6 months, I got 10 paid days off. Now I thought, because it was like 6 months that I got the 10 days, I thought, oh, in another 6 months I'll get another 10 days. But that was not the case. It was a year later that I got more days. Basically, it was the first year and a half that I worked there, I got 10 paid days off. I don't know if that's like a lot or little compared to other countries and stuff, but Australia is pretty good with days off. If you are casual, it is not that hard to get time off. And even if you are full-time, I believe you get like 4 weeks. 4 weeks, a year or something. But obviously I wanted to go back to Australia to visit my family. Obviously I wanted to go to America to visit Logan, but it was so darn hard for me to get time off. And that is why Logan came and visited me in Japan 4 times. 4 times! 4 times! That is amazing, and I loved him so much for it. I really, really appreciated it, and I was only able to visit him once. And that one time was just for 5 days. during Christmas time. To do that, I actually had to use all of my days off. So I had been with a company for not even a year yet, and I had used all of my days off. And I remember talking to like my senpais, and they were like, oh my god, you've used all your days off already, because at least Japanese people tend to keep them. But it was really funny because I saw this happen so many times. There was quite a high turnover in my company, so a lot of people would quit, a lot of people would start, and so many people, when they would quit, they would have like 15 days off left, so they would have to take it all in the last month and like get paid for it, and then they'd like quit. And I'm like, why don't you just like use it when you want to then? I don't know, but getting days off was definitely a hard thing in Japan. People I worked with were amazing. I will put it out there, at least in the area that I worked at and everyone I worked with, I was the only mixed race or foreign person there. So everyone was like fully Japanese. So I was the only Hafu or foreigner that worked in my area. Someone did ask me the question, how was it working as a foreigner? Did I get stuck with the bad jobs and whatever? Not at all. There was no discrimination for my race, which like it is different for me because I am definitely part Japanese. I mean, my like last name's Tanaka, which is literally like the most Japanese name you can get. But I definitely didn't get any discrimination against being half or being mixed in my company, and they respected me and actually was like admired me for especially being able to speak English, since in my workplace it was something that was used often. And the people were absolutely amazing. I had such nice people. Of course there's going to be people who you just don't like or don't get along with or are just not nice people no matter where you work. So of course there were some people like that, but generally speaking everyone I worked with was wonderful, and I definitely made some really close friends basically for the first time, like real close actual Japanese friends for the first time in my life, and it was amazing. It was awesome. Something I should mention about people and working in Japan is the hierarchy. So hierarchy is definitely a like set in stone, very thing. It is definitely a thing in Japan where there is hierarchy depending on how long you have worked at a company. Quick Japanese lesson. Doki is someone who basically started at the same time as you. In my company it was like same year. Usually in most companies it's the same, but Doki is someone who started at the same time as you, so basically you have equal hierarchy. Kohai is someone who came in after you, so they are below you per se, and then senpai is someone who is above you, so someone who has been there longer than you, knows more than you, and has higher status than you. So it is definitely a thing in Japan. You have to speak formally, speak in keigo to your senpai. If you don't, you'd probably get slapped across the face. Usually with Doki you would most of the time speak non-formally, although I had people speaking formally to me because I started at the very start of my year, and people who were hired on like in the same year but after me would speak to me formally and stuff, and I would be like, please don't, because I hate it, it tires me out. But people would still speak it because it's just such like a thing that's basically like grinded into your soul when you grow up in Japan. Like you speak keigo formal to your senpai, and you have to, and respect that and respect everything with them. That's definitely a huge difference compared to Australia or America, at least where I worked in America. Like there is no real formal way of speaking in English. There's definitely more polite ways to speak, but it's not like a whole different not language, but a whole different way of speaking. For me that was a lot. I had never really been in a situation where I had to speak keigo basically continuously every single day. It was great for me, I learned a lot, but it was definitely tiring, and also like worrying about like, oh, they're my senpai, like I don't know them but I'm assuming they're above me, like do I speak keigo to them? I should, and like I don't want to disrespect them. Like it was something that was mentally going on for me, which I believe for people in Japan who grew up there it's probably not, you know, something they have to think about, but for me it was something that I definitely had to be like conscious of. Whereas I feel like in Australia, like your buddies with your manager, your buddies with people who've been there for like years, it doesn't really matter, you're just like a whole big family. So that was definitely like a big thing for me working in Japan. That was different. But the general atmosphere of my workplace was very chilled. As I said, it's not like a regular office or workplace in Japan. It was very relaxed, and after I kind of got used to being there and everyone got to know me, I definitely felt like I could let more of myself out, be a bit more chillaxed, and kind of be like, hey, like you guys can adopt the overseas way of thinking too. Let's just like have fun and work. Like it doesn't have to be all rules and all like structured and all of that. So the company definitely allowed me to do that, so I definitely got more comfortable being there, but it is not the same as working in Australia or America. So I would say that is the general working side of Japan, and now I'm going to go into, I guess, Japanese people in general and kind of like an an overall opinion. It's definitely an opinion and not everyone might feel this way, so I'm just put out there, this is how I felt in Japan. I've always felt that Japan has like an island mentality, which I don't even know is a thing, but they are a very small island. They have such rich history and culture, and they've been that way for a very, very long time. So they're not as global or multicultural, especially compared to Australia. Australia is very multicultural. I grew up being mixed race here and didn't have a problem. Yes, I may have been discriminated like once or twice in my life, but it wasn't like a big thing. And there's so many people from so many different countries that it basically doesn't matter. And it's like, what really even is an Australian anyway? Like, we're all just from all over the place. Compared to Japan, whereas if you are not 100% Japanese, they will know. They will know. I have so many people who would come up to me and before they even say hello, they're like, are you half? Are you mixed? Instantly. And I'm like, yeah, like, which is fine. And it's not usually like, ugh, kind of. It's like, oh my god, are you half? It's like an admiration kind of thing. But it was like, yeah, you could say like hello to me first, or like, why do you have to point that out? Like, we're all human, we're all the same. Like, I am still as much Japanese as I am Australian, but I'll get to that more into that part of it later. Yeah, it's just like a kind of slightly closed-minded mentality. So anything new and different, they are still shocked and find it like, people always say people in Japan are super friendly, which I agree with, but I also feel like sometimes it's like a mask or something they put on. Like in customer service and stuff, they're amazing and they will do like, go above and beyond to do everything for you. But just as a person, like in general, they might not 100% mean it all the time, which is like really hard to hear. And I'm sure a lot of people don't think that. So like, if you don't think that, that's totally fine. But there is a saying in Japan called honne to tatemae, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Honne to tatemae. Basically, honne is like the truth and tatemae is basically like what you say or like what you put up as like a mask. To me, that's kind of like a, it's okay to be two-faced phrase, which I'm sure that's not the way they mean it. For me, who is someone who I'm usually quite blunt and honest, and if you don't like me, please say to my face, don't pretend to like me if you don't, kind of thing, if you get what I mean. So that's like one thing that I feel like is different in America and Australia. If they don't like you, they'll definitely kind of make it clear, at least compared to Japanese people. Another thing is that people don't really stand up for themselves in Japan. Standing out from the crowd, as I was saying before, is something that like people don't like doing or people don't do. A lot of people just in general, and then a lot of women cannot stand up for themselves, will not speak up for themselves. And I think that's why there is a lot of assault, sexual assault and stuff in Japan. There's this phrase called chikan and it happens a lot in Japanese trains. If you have been in a full Japanese train, it's probably like the single most thing I hated about living in Japan is being packed into these like super full trains. But it happens a lot in trains when people's bodies are very close and men will like touch women inappropriately, and most women cannot voice themselves. They can't say stop, they can't say they just kind of deal with it. So it's kind of like a really big thing in Japan. It has been for a long time. I did not personally experience it, but I've had family and friends who have experienced it, and it is quite common. I think it's just like the way you're brought up. Like, don't speak out for yourself, don't stand up for yourself, like don't stand out. You don't want to do that. Just kind of keep your head down and be like everyone else, is kind of the way that people are brought up in Japan, which I think shouldn't be the case. In Japan was definitely not that way. I voiced myself when I needed to. I did all the time. Going back to the train situation, but people like will not say excuse me to get out of a jam-packed train. Like jam-packed. And they don't even say excuse me, like I need to get out. They will like push and rub against you and squeeze in silence to get out of the door. Just say excuse me, like just say sumimasen, like I need to get out. So I would always do that and people would do it. Like as soon as you say it, people do it, but like people don't even want to like raise their voice and like don't even want to be seen or heard. Like it's quite insane. Not saying everyone is that way, it is a generalization obviously with everything I'm saying, but it's just like what I felt being there. And I would even do it for like other people. Like other people are trying to get out of the train as people are getting, I'll be like, sumimasen, this person looks like they need to get out, can you let them out? It's just insane that like people just like don't. Another thing I may quickly mention is like sexuality. It is definitely more common and more okay than it used to be, say, bisexual or homosexual in Japan, but they say they're open about it, but I would not say that, especially if you compare to like Australia and America, where it is very open and how same-sex marriage is even legal. And I know of many people who are open with their sexuality, whereas in Japan, like, people say, yeah, we'll accept you for everything, but people still feel like they can't be their true selves, which like goes back to the whole can't voice themselves, can't stand up for themselves thing. If you are a foreigner in Japan, it's probably a lot easier to be gay or bi per se, but if you are Japanese living in Japan, I would say it's a lot harder to come out with that. You can, and a lot of people are, but it's not as widely accepted, and I feel like people just know that, so they won't. All right. My mouth is so dry, I'm talking so much. I'm sorry if this is literally like the longest video ever, but we just have a little bit to go. As I said earlier, I'm going to talk a little bit of my experience being mixed race, or Hafu as they call it in Japan. I think it's funny that they have the phrase Hafu, which usually Japanese people mean Japanese half, like you're half Japanese or you're quarter Japanese, you're part Japanese and something else. They don't really use the phrase mixed, which I think makes a lot more sense because it's just like a mixture of races, whereas in Japan it's like Hafu. It's like, okay, one of your parents is something and one of your parents is other. I'm like, well, what if like one of them is 2/4 something, or like, you know, it's just... Anyway, I was considered a half. I am a half. Like, my mum is genuinely Japanese and my dad is genuinely Australian, but then you get into like, but they were Welsh and Irish and German and all of that, and it's just like, Australia. In Australia and in America, I look Asian to most people, whereas in Japan, like, of course I do look Japanese, but they can tell I'm not fully Japanese. They can just tell by my features, probably my hair, and they can just like assume and guess that I am not fully Japanese. I try to kind of think of some pros and cons, although the pros, I can only think of one. And it's the admiration aspect of halves in Japan. If I was born like 10 years prior to when I was, I probably would have been discriminated for being mixed race. But the time I was born and now, being half is a lot more common, and it is definitely like admired upon. They have contact lenses to make you look half, makeup tutorials to make you look half. Like, a lot of people want to look half. It's like the desired look, how you have that mixture of Japan, that familiarity, and then a mixture of something different that people aren't used to. So many people are like, oh, I wish I was half, blah, blah, blah. There's many pros within that, but basically everything links back to being an admiration. Oh my gosh, your eyes are so big. Oh my gosh, you can speak English. Oh my gosh, your hair is so wavy. But that was pretty much the only thing I could like really think of that was like a positive, and I appreciated it. Like, a lot of people did make comments to me while being there. I feel like slowly it kind of, when I became more and more like used to living in Japan and more like Japanese, I feel like it wasn't as evident. But especially when Logan was over and like when me and Logan would travel, people would see me as a foreigner instantly, because I was with Logan, who's like classic white man and also we would speak English all the time, so people would definitely like see me as foreign. And then when I spoke Japanese, they're like, oh my god, you're half, and I'm like, oh my god, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But generally speaking, the pros of being half in Japan was being admired. The cons, one really funny one would be that they assume that you can't speak Japanese. It wasn't, as I said, as big of a problem towards, especially like later on for me, but I had experienced multiple times where people would speak to me in English and then I would respond in Japanese, and then they will continue to speak to me in English. They just assume to the point where they like basically block their ears out and like don't expect to hear Japanese coming out of your mouth, that they assume that you are speaking English to them when you are actually indeed speaking the same language. There was a time where I went to get photos taken in a kimono for my 20th. I was blonde then, granted, but my Japanese was obviously fine, and I was speaking Japanese to the guy the whole time, and he would be like, a little bit right? And I'd be like, migi desu ka? Mouchotto migi ni ikeba ii desu ka? Like fully responding in Japanese, and he's like, yes, right. And I'm like, what? And that has happened many times, and I'm sure if you even are a foreigner who can speak Japanese, you will find that it's just like it doesn't register in their head.
すいません。
はい。ご注文の方決まりですか?
Oh, sorry, I don't speak Japanese.
彼女は日本語がわかんないんですよ。今日のおすすめは何ですか?
すいません、ちょっと英語わかんないんで。
So that's one thing I thought was really funny. These 2 points are kind of the same thing, but basically they will see you differently. You are different even though you are Japanese. you are different because you're not 100% Japanese, and they will never fully accept you as a Japanese person. They like acknowledge you are part Japanese and they think it's really cool, but they will never fully accept you as a Japanese person. I don't know if any of you guys know of the story of, she was a Miss Japan or a Miss Universe Japan, and she was half black, half Japanese girl, and she won, and she's so pretty and she's so amazing, but basically people were like, Japanese people, I don't feel comfortable with her representing Japan. She's not Japanese, she doesn't look Japanese, she shouldn't be Miss Japan, when she was just as much Japanese as her other race. Things like that, like they think it's cool and they admire you and all of that, but in the end they will like never fully accept you for being Japanese. It's just the way Japan is. Hopefully it's something that will change and it'll become way more common. I definitely didn't have a bad time or like felt discriminated against or anything in Japan. It's just something that they're not gonna fully accept me. And that's okay. But I think that is generally it. I'm gonna have a quick look at the post and see if I missed any questions that someone asked or someone's added any. Logan Harding asked, how's the sushi, melon pan, and dorayaki? Well, I'ma tell you, it's super good. All of it is delicious. Oh, someone did ask, wondering if you have any tips for adjusting and fitting into Japanese culture. It might be hard, but what will probably allow you to be more accepted and be like them is to just be like them. Just try to act more Japanese, which like is definitely a lot harder said than done, but it'll naturally come as well. Like I felt like I was a lot more Japanese and more acting like them and the culture towards the end of my time there, which personally I didn't really like. I felt like I was like changing as a person. I would just say be like them, because that's pretty much the way they're gonna accept you the most. With their exception, you'll probably feel more like you fit in there. So I know that's probably not like specific advice, but learn from your surrounding, learn from people around you to just be more like them, which I hate that. It's like conforming, but that's like the general culture in Japan is conformity. So what was the hardest part about living in Japan? From Diane. I think I kind of covered it. I think it's just like, in the end, I always set out to be in Japan for a year, which I ended up being there for almost 2 years. I was there for 22 months. And it just came down to, for me, growing up in Australia, my mindset on everything is so different to the mindset of people in Japan. And it's not like I couldn't do it, but I was never fully comfortable, and I never fully like felt at home and felt like this is the place for me, this is where I will be forever. It's amazing to visit, the most amazing place ever, like no words, and I'm sure anyone who has been is that way as well. And I actually would like to live there again at some point, although not to work a regular job. But if I could say like do YouTube, do my own thing while living in Japan, I would 100% want to live there. I would just say like not ever feeling like fully at home living in Japan was probably the hardest thing, and the reason why I didn't stay there. Australia's my place. I just feel like I belong being the way I am. Like it doesn't matter, and no one would ever be like, you're not Australian. Like no one would ever say that to me. So yeah, I'm sorry this was literally like the longest video. It's gonna take me so long to edit, so awesome. But I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please, if you do have any more questions, leave it in a comment below and I will answer them directly to you. And I hope this was somewhat of an insight to you guys if you do live in Japan or have been thinking about living in Japan or have lived in Japan before. And please let me know if there's anything you agree on or even disagree on. Obviously everyone has different experiences. This is what I experienced in Japan, and a lot of things I talk in a general way, not saying everyone is that way, but this is my personal experience of living in Japan as myself, as half, for a total of about 2 years. And I definitely can't wait for the day that I get to visit again. If you did like the video, please give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because I would love to see you again, love to see you around, and I guess I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye!